meeting back to order. We'll move on with the consent calendar. The following consent items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They may be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested person may request that an item be removed from the consent calendar for discussion and consideration. At this point, I have requests to remove items C4 and C9. Are there any others?
Move approval of the consent calendar as distributed to the membership and the public.
Second. Been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to item C4, which is the county claims list. Ms. Rignell?
Board, Connie Rignell, Auditor Controller.
Ms. Rignell, I spoke earlier to Mr. Foreman, and I was looking for a bit of background information on the item of the gas cards.
Yes.
If you care to make any observations, and then we can hear from Mr. Foreman.
Well, any items that appear on this claims list before you are because they are not viewed as normal and customary in my office, or they do not comply with the board-approved purchasing policies and procedures. And this one was not deemed to be normal and customary from our standpoint, so we put it before the board for their approval.
Thank you, Ms. Rignell.
One of the obligations for the probation department when they're working with kids is to assure that our first assurance is to try to keep them from going to placement, and then if they have to go to placement, to try to make sure that we reunify them as early as we can. The family involvement is an extremely important endeavor. In that process, we use a case plan on the entire family to affect whatever changes we can to assure that reunification or not going to placement is done. We are often called upon to provide different items that would cost some dollars. For instance, sometimes we have to provide clothing for kids when they're going to placement, some personal supplies, sometimes there's incentives to incite some positive outcomes. One of those, in terms of the family reintegration process, is the family visitation. And occasionally, it doesn't happen very often, that we have to help facilitate transportation of a family member to the individual so that we can, help with the process of their reuniting so that they can come home. And this two situations here, transportation for a parent came to our attention. One of them was to visit an individual that was in Barrow Boys Camp, which is several hours away, and we provided the transportation through a gas card for the individual to go visit the offender there, who is currently doing very well and is planned to be reunited home. And the other one was for a father that we, in a situation we were trying to prevent out-of-home placement. This father had a hard time getting to the court hearings, and we provided some assistance so that he could facilitate that process through the court and the judge's awarding of the custody to him. In terms of accountability, if I might, I'm guessing that you might ask on that, is that the gas card process, although we use it extremely rare, the gas card process is a card that can only be used for gas. It can't be used for anything else. It's at the pump, and we have those assurances and we account for that, and then we follow up with the parent afterwards to account for their trip.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. Move approval of the staff recommendation.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item C9, which is the agreement with the State of California Department of Alcohol and Drug Programs. Ms. McKenzie or Mr. McKeon?
Ms. McKenzie, thank you. Could you provide us a synopsis of the staff report and any concerns that you may hold relative to the implementation of this agreement?
Well, thanks for the opportunity to speak a little bit about this.
unlike the conversation we just had about AB 109, there were 8 programs, count them 8 big programs realigned in the Health and Human Services Agency in fiscal year 11-12, and 2 more to be added in 12-13. And those programs are large. They're things like adoptions, assistance, and foster care payments and child welfare, a $35 million operation in Shasta County. But the one I'm speaking about specifically in this contract were the drug and alcohol programs that were realigned. And the one I think of most concern to me, that's a federal entitlement, which means anyone who's eligible for the services we're supposed to be available to provide them, is drug Medi-Cal services. And drug Medi-Cal services, when I looked at the allocation methodology that was used for the statewide distribution of dollars, I became very concerned that we had a very low percentage in the column of what Shasta County would receive. And so in asking questions about that, it became clear that our historic use had been modest, I think largely because we were concerned about operating those drug and alcohol programs within our mental health system, not realigned at the time, and drug Medi-Cal not realigned at the time, and wanted to make sure that we could cash flow regularly that program, and so we didn't grow our claims significantly in that program. And so the allocation was based upon actual claiming data, comparable across the counties, but still very underrepresenting what our Medi-Cal eligible population is in Shasta County. And knowing full well the drug and alcohol treatment needs we have in Shasta County for a variety of criminal justice and other reasons, it's concerning to me that this program is going to be realigned to us at a very low percentage and potentially have that allocation percentage stuck for a 20-year period of time, like many of the other realignment programs are that we operate in Health and Human Services. So we did some work in our shop to try to confirm what the allocations look like statewide, and have tried to make as much noise as possible about the allocation methodology going forward. So the report was kind of summarizing those concerns. This contract document actually pulls the money out that formerly came in a contract form to us because it was realigned, and so the contract goes down by hundreds of thousands of dollars as the funding is now flowing through a realignment account rather than through this contract document. So it seemed an appropriate time to let you all know with the reduction in this contract, the responsibilities will still be county government's responsibilities. Now they'll just be in another form called Public Safety Realignment 2011. Does that help?
Thank you, Ms. McKenzie. I'll move approval of the staff recommendation.
Second.
Moved and second. Any other discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
When you first read that, though, it looks like we're going to lose the money, but you got to keep going. Thank you.
Shasta County Board of Supervisors will recess and convene as the Shasta County Water Agency. The Shasta County Board of Supervisors is not receiving additional compensation or stipend for acting as the Shasta County Water Agency. First item is North Fork Battle Creek Groundwater Basin Grant Application. Mr. Minturn.
Good morning, Chairman Modi, Pat Minturn, Public Works Director, and Chief Engineer of the Water Agency today. Before you today is a proposed grant application to study the North Fork Groundwater Basin. There are 10 groundwater basins in Shasta County. To give a little bit of background, a groundwater basin is basically a hole in the ground that's filled with sands and gravels and loose material, and then filled with water as well. So there's saturated water at the bottom. And that could be as small as a single little meadow. But there are 10 groundwater basins in Shasta County that are large enough to be recognized as such by the Department of Water Resources. The most important of those is the Redding Groundwater Basin, and that underlies everything, the entire Redding Basin. 90% of the population, about a third of the agriculture in the whole county is here in the Redding Basin. But there are others as well. 8 of them are up in the Intermountain area. They're under Goose Valley, they're under Fall River, and a couple on Burney Creek. Areas anywhere where you've got some alluvial soil and enough precipitation to trap some groundwater there, and it remains. And then the 10th one is the North Fork Battle Creek Basin. This is up above Shingletown. The exact limits are not very well defined. This is the 44 here, and you see it follows the water courses up there, Bear Creek and Battle Creek, and we're anywhere we've got a little bit of alluvial soil. And this is Viola here, and Shingletown's down here. This is Lake Macomber. Lake Macomber is probably a major recharge point for it. The most notable feature in there is probably the Lassen Pines Mutual Water Company, our water district, and there are about 500 property owners overall in this basin with about 7,000 parcels that we would recognize. A lot of that is timber and so forth. So 500 property owners, about half of those property owners are probably in the Lassen Pines Water Company. And Lassen Pines supports what we're doing here. They are relying on the groundwater basin themselves, and it's a matter of local control. So what we're talking about here, this was really started by state legislation, but there's interest also up in the basin. There's interest in what's underneath there. There have been proposals over the years for some export and so forth, so the local folks have a real interest in their water resources. But out of sight, out of mind for many years, until state legislation came along a few years ago that mandated that we need to start studying these basins. We need to have better control of them. And so there was legislation that said by 2014, locals need to take an active role in managing these basins, or potentially the state will do it for us. The state already monitors many of these basins, particularly the Redding Groundwater Basin through DWR, and they intend to continue to do so, and that water monitoring is useful to us. And of course, Lassen Pines monitors their wells, and potentially that information is useful in this process. But what's proposed is a more elaborate more elaborate program with some public input. We would hire a consultant. That consultant would study in greater detail than what you see here with this map, try to better define the limits of the basin, where the higher yielding areas are, where the recharge areas are. It's always a mystery. Where we know where the water is and we know where we can get at it, but where is it coming from? So to have a better idea of that, a geologist would study this in greater detail and possibly propose some basin objectives for how this could be managed to figure out if we start to have a sustained overdraft of the basin or like that. We have some sort of an awareness of what's going on down there. Although that's unlikely. The land uses in this area are pretty benign. You've got a light footprint, large parcels, and the basin appears to be stable, and we don't have a lot of growth in that area. Most of it's in the Lassen Pines Mutual Water Company. And so staff recommends that we go forward with a grant application for up to $75,000 to support these efforts. And the funding source would be Prop 84, which has supplied hundreds of millions of dollars for various activities throughout California. But I know there have been some concerns expressed in the past about what strings might be attached to this grant. From the looks of it, it looks pretty benign. We do not see any conditions regarding greenhouse gases or that sort of thing. It's very much a tailored, focused program to try and find out something about our groundwater basin and provide local control of that resource. But recognizing the board's concern, I recommended that the grant application be submitted and then brought back before this board so that you can really read through it and we can satisfy ourselves as to what we're doing before we go forward. I would point out, though, that if we don't make some sort of an effort up there, first of all, the folks up there want to see some effort to understand this basin. Secondly, the state has mandated that we need to do something by 2014 to start monitoring and have a better idea for ourselves. And $75,000 is a lot of money to find locally. And so staff recommends that the board pursue this grant at this time. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Matern. Mr. Hosden, I do have some speaker request forms as well.
Does this have anything to do with the proposed water project from a spring up there? No one kind of finding out where that water comes from? Is there any connection?
I can't tell you that there is a direct connection there, because we don't understand the hydrogeology very well up there.
Will this help us understand that?
Certainly it would. I think that project was a little farther down the hill. I don't think that's actually in this basin. I think that was a small perched basin they were talking about, too small to really quantify as a groundwater basin. But the more we look, the better we'll understand.
Well, this may feed into that. I mean, it's going downhill.
It's very possible.
Any other questions at this time? And I'll go to our speaker requests. Patricia Heinsohn, followed by Gary Catt.
Thank you. I respectfully ask that you not vote for this resolution. Many citizens have repeatedly objected to Shasta County's being a part of the Northern Sacramento Integrated Regional Water Management Plan, both at Board of Supervisors meetings, the Technical Advisory Committee meetings of the sanctioned by the NSIR WMP and also the NSIR WMP Board. We don't want a regional governance structure over anything, much less water. Because we all know that the United States of America is a republic based on the United States Constitution with amendments and the California State Constitution, you've taken an oath to uphold that. The organization of our government is designed specifically to be run locally at the smallest unit of a town or a county, and that's where the power is supposed to be concentrated. And then the state. This regional government robs the people of its power. The citizens have read Proposition 84. We've read UN Agenda 21, and we've learned about ICLEI, and we've told you, the TAC and the NSIR WMP Board, that Prop 84 is a UN Agenda 21 plan. This is not a conspiracy, Mr. Keogh. It's not hysterics either. We've asked you to please check these documents as we've done, and you'd see for yourself that's exactly what's true. So we assume that you've done your due diligence as we have as citizens who are patriotic. You've all sworn to uphold the United States Constitution and the California State Constitution, and nothing in either of these two documents allows for a regional government or bowing down to the UN and any of its myriad of forms. So we can, if you move forward with supporting membership in the ISRWMP and passing this resolution, we can then only assume that you want to chip away at our republic and move towards a one-world government. None of us wants to believe that this Proposition 84 could ever be passed in its sinister form by the state, and that even the majority of voters could even be fooled, but nonetheless it's true. I'm sorry, it's really true. And I don't expect that you're going to thank me as you did the sheriff and the chief for my bluntness, but this is so serious that it really requires very plain speaking. And I would vehemently disagree with Mr. Minturn with respect that doing so is benign, because even if the grant is once it's applied, my understanding, once it's applied for, that you would have to agree to implement 16 standards, one of which is a climate action plan. And thank you for the extra seconds.
Thank you, Ms. Heinzen. Mr. Cadd, followed by Mr. Charles Alexander.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, staff, and ladies and gentlemen of the public. Well, here we are. NSVIRWM has come home. There's been a large number of us have been going to the regional meetings down in Willows, whether it was the TAC committee, their technical advisory committee, or the board, and following what's going on. If you look on your second, I think it's actually the third page, the resolution on your agenda item, safe drinking water, water quality and supply, flood water, River Coastal Protection Act of 2006. This is Proposition 84. That's the long title of Prop 84. Proposition 84 is quite a piece of legislation. It has 16 standards, as been mentioned. Of those 16 standards, two of them are data management, which is greenhouse gas management. Well, under greenhouse gas management, it's recommended that anybody that applies for a grant, that it'd be a good idea if they join the California Climate Action Registry. This is rather interesting if you join the Climate Action Registry, because the foundation of the Climate Action Registry is a group from the United Nations, Rio plus 20, which is going to happen here in a couple of, well, actually in a couple of days this weekend, I believe. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Well, if you go on page 73 of Prop 84, if you go to Prop 84 guidelines and Google it, you'll get the 84 pages of this Prop 84. On page 73, it will lead you to two websites. I would recommend you do not go there, because those websites are infected with the black hole exploit kit, which is one of the latest viruses on the internet. So having said that, this whole integrated water thing with Prop 84, there are standards that are going to have to be met. I have met umpteen times with the Department of Water Resources, Dan McManus down in Red Bluff. And in the process of understanding this and going through and understanding, I have read and I understand Prop 84. I know where we're going. I know what we're going to lock ourselves into. There are so many strings attached to this money that the folks are not going to believe what's coming up. And I know that Mr. Modi's on the board. I don't know if he has read Prop 84 or if he understands it. I know that at the last board meeting we went to, I and several others asked that question, and I think that there are 2 people on the 18-member board that have actually read it and understand it. This is dangerous. Now, granted, you may need the $75,000, but to go through the IRWM with the state of California is not the way to go, because it's going to be locking our water. And they also, could I have just another few seconds, Mr. Modi, please?
A few seconds.
Also, you've mentioned in your staff report SBX 776. SBX 76 is to monitor the basin and sub-basin. Once we start monitoring the basins and sub-basins under the IRWM, we are going to wind up having a problem in the future with people with their wells and monitoring wells individually. This is coming.
Mr. Cabb, if you would sum up, please.
We all know that's coming. So this is not something that we should be doing as a county. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cadd. Mr. Charles Alexander.
Thank you for the opportunity here today to address the board on this matter. Groundwater monitoring. How do we know that this is not going to lead to individual well monitoring? As we have heard from previous speakers, the answer is it will lead to individual well monitoring. Even now, there are anecdotes of people who are being denied use permits for well pumps unless they agree to submit their wells to monitoring. This happens even now, and this will eventually facilitate, at least politically, if not legally and otherwise, the eventual attempt at fitting smart meters to private water wells. And that will eventually facilitate, either politically, legally, or both, the installation of such smart meters as are already in use in the Netherlands, by which individual appliances may be turned on and off at will by remote control by a central authority according to such guidelines as they see fit to implement at a given time. In other words, people lose control over their own, in this case, water usage. Once the camel's nose is allowed into the tent, it becomes more difficult to reject the rest of the camel. And such is the case here with well monitoring, not to mention all the other things that come along with signing on to this IRWM proposal. We're setting ourselves up for something that is potentially very dangerous, to say the least. And we're moving in the wrong direction. It's time to stop this runaway freight train before something bad happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. That's all the requests I have. Board, have any questions? Mr. Keough?
Thank you, Chairman Modi. Mr. Minturn, second paragraph under discussion indicates in 2011 the governor signed AB 1152, which added the requirement that local agencies develop groundwater management plans for each basin before 2014. Now, we have been encouraged this morning by some of the speakers not to apply for this money. So, in the world of practical finance, if we don't apply for this money, how would you propose that we accomplish all these studies? Are we going to have to fund it out of the general fund?
That would be one potential source. This is the smallest and most benign, perhaps, of the groundwater basins in Shasta County. So this particular groundwater basin is but one of 10. The largest that we oversee here, the Redding groundwater basin, of course, has far more import. And so the relative costs of proposing a complete go-it-alone strategy is considerably larger than perhaps 10 times what would be cost on this basin. The proposal here is for $75,000. That's a relatively modest investment. Perhaps that $75,000 could be funded out of the general fund. Perhaps it could be funded out of the water agency. Of course, it would displace other potential uses. But on a larger basis, the Redding groundwater basin and the studies that have gone forward there, the integrated groundwater management plan that this board has adopted back in the 90s in conjunction with the cities and so forth, those are much more elaborate undertakings, and it becomes more expensive progressively. So I can't immediately answer your question about what our funding source would be, but certainly the general fund would be one potential source.
Many of the speakers this morning were fearful about regional and state mandates that may be imposed upon us here in Shasta County. And in a way, I understand that. I'd like to get your perspective. Are those concerns, those fears, well-founded?
Start off by saying that it's always helpful to bring a certain skepticism to the water industry. There are certainly, water is a scarce resource. And even between neighbors, it helps to have a clear understanding of what the course of action is proposed with water, and how we're going to go forward and how we're going to share that resource and use that resource. That said, I would like to clarify some potential misconceptions. One is that the 6-county group that's going forward with the Northern Sac Valley Integrated Water Management Plan, that plan is aimed at the Sacramento Valley Groundwater Basin and its extension, the Redding Groundwater Basin. So this is completely hydrologically separate, this basin that we're talking about here. This is an isolated mountain basin. The only way out of it is by creeks flowing out of the North Fork of Battle Creek. So this is a separate area. The management of this groundwater basin is probably never going to be any more than an understanding of how it functions. It's aimed towards local control, and I'd point out that the largest user in that basin is the Lassen Pines Water Company, and we have the support of those folks, and those folks monitor their own wells And for their own knowledge, they maintain their own pumps, and they're just providing domestic water to a couple hundred of local residents. The monitoring that's proposed would be entirely voluntary, and we sent out letters to property owners seeking voluntary participation, and we're happy whether they want to or not. Some folks volunteered to participate, and it's mostly the Lassen Pines folks, and we're happy to have that local participation. We're happy to have that local participation in the public meetings. We're happy to have that participation in guiding the resource. And I point out that this is a local resource that benefits the folks up there in the Shingletown area, and they're concerned about other things. They're concerned about water quality. They're concerned about folks that may tap their basins. And I'd point out that local means local, and I think that the folks up in Shingletown, their concerns need to be heard as well. And I think that as long as we are in partnership with Lassen Pines and we're in tune with the property owners up there, I think we're probably on the right track.
Thank you, Mr. Minter.
Supervisor Baugh.
Thank you, Chair Modi. A couple of the speakers made reference to the North Valley Integrated Plan, but this is not part of that plan, is it?
No, sir.
So the connection perhaps would be the Prop 84 monies would be the connection that they're referring to, but this is not something that's going to go through that other county regional board for approval or conversation. This is a decision of the Shasta County Water Agency?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Hawes, Supervisor Hawes referred earlier to the folks in Shingletown and the challenge of water there. And I would say the understatement of the decade would be that they are concerned about water. They are very concerned about water. And to that point, when a local businessman proposed to tap that, as you mentioned, they managed to bring together, I would say, about 2,000 people on the Hill in opposition to that movement, and have succeeded in themselves continuing the very effort that we're trying to assist them with. This is exactly what they've asked for. This information supplied to the residents of the Hill and Shingletown, Lassen Pines, is exactly what they want. They want to understand the water basin, how it flows, where it migrates, and through the fractured structure, how it's possible to maintain that resource for the use of the community. Those are all questions we really don't have the answer to. Without this study, I'm not able to tell the citizens that I represent in Shingletown and Viola that we can help them with their future decisions. And I would say they will use this information, we know up front, to oppose exporting that water. And so be it. That is their right to stand up for the protection of their local water. And as their supervisor, I have stood with them on those issues as well. So I'm going to support this. We need this information.
I have just one clarification, I think, just so we don't leave this room with the misunderstanding. You mentioned that there is no direct connection with IRWM, and as you very clearly pointed, other than maybe Prop 84 monies, but there is no control by the IRWM. And you asked the question of would it go before them for approval, which he said no. I want to clarify that regional board has no approving authority for anything. What they are doing is putting together goals and objectives that will help establish some guidelines for those who want to get support from the IRWM for future grants for water projects, and then that would get support going forward to the state who would make the approval. The IRWM has no regulatory authority, has no approval authority. It can't deny anybody's grant application. It can't approve anybody's grant application. They're there just to be a collaborative supporting effort with a strong voice to the people in Sacramento, as you stated, Mr. Minturn, to not take our water, to protect our water rights and protect the quality and those things that we're all very concerned about. So I want people to recognize that it is not a regulatory board. It can't approve anything. Okay. Any other discussion?
Good discussion.
Pleasure of the board.
Move approval.
Second.
Moved in second. Any other? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
The Water Agency will adjourn and reconvene as the Board of Supervisors. Moving on to R3, administrative update, legislative update. Mr. Lees? Board reports. Mr. Hawes?
Oh, just a couple little things. My wife and I attended a nice function for the Women's Refuge down at Sierra Pacific on Friday evening. It was a little warm, but they had a good turnout. Believe me, it was very, very well done. It's a beautiful place there. Just to mention on an earlier speaker, Mr. Wade mentioned the fact that, he's trying to connect a power plant with global warming. Well, probably everything that we do has some connection, but I want to just mention that he mentioned the wrong company. It was Sierra Pacific Industries, not Wheelabrator, but they plant probably more trees than any other entity in the whole North State. So they're doing their part to take care of carbon sequestration. And hey, I even plant some myself. So we're all doing our share to help improve our climate. That's all I have to say.
Supervisor Hartman?
I'll pass, thank you.
Supervisor Vaughn?
Thank you, Chair Modi. I have several things I'd like to share with the board. One is I did attend the Rural Counties meeting last week in Sacramento, representing the board on legislative issues. I wanted to bring up just one thing in regards to some changes that were made at the Rural Counties Board. And the first one is there was a slight change in the fee structure that we pay and that all counties pay. Overall, the total amount being requested for the year is very similar to that of past years. Last year, the total amount from counties was just a hair under $200,000, and this year the total amount is $201,000, so not a whole lot of change. The last time the fees were evaluated was at the 2000 census, and they evaluate them every 10 years, and they're based upon population. So some counties have had slight increases in population, some counties have had slight decreases in population. Shasta County, by comparison to the rest of the counties, its fee is going to go up slightly from $11,875 to $13,000. Overall, I'd like to share with the board and with the community that we actually pay the 31-member counties only 5% of the overall costs of legislative representation in Sacramento. The total budget for RCRC for the 2012 year is $4 million. So that $200,000 is a very small part of that. In my mind, it remains one of the very best investments that we make in Shasta County. There is no way for our $13,000 for this next year we could afford even to pay the travel of someone back and forth to Sacramento multiple times to represent us on these issues, and they do a good job of representing us. So I did vote on behalf of this board in favor of that slight change. I just wanted to inform you of that. I would also point out that I have available for board members the annual audit review of both Regional Council of Counties and the National Homebuyers Fund, and I would continue to make just the obvious observation that the finances used come from the business model owned by RCRC, associated with RCRC, and not from the counties, and that's how they continue to be able to afford to represent us. So I'm grateful for that. I would like to also request of Mr. Lees that you would consider perhaps getting together with our chair and writing one more letter to the Board of Forestry. There's an August 8th deadline, and I know we've already done that, but I believe we need to continue to hear from the board in opposition to SRA fees and those that we represent in our county. I would tell you that all of the other counties are also continuing to send additional letters with this new evaluation process. Deadline August 8th. We do have a fact sheet we can make available to you, Mr. Lees, if you would like. And then just one more request that came from Siskiyou County of Shasta County. If we could have someone on your evaluation staff find out for us if we have any customers in Shasta County receiving power from Pacific Power. Siskiyou County would like to know that, and if so, they have made the request that perhaps County Council would take that information, contact their county council. They have some questions in regard to that, if we'd be able to supply that information to them.
I think we do.
I'm thinking so too, just right across the border, but I wasn't positive, and I thought the best place is just to get the information to them if we have a source. I would like to offer congratulations. I attended a barbecue at the Cottonwood Community Park, and a dedication made a presentation on behalf of the Shasta County Board. They continue to upgrade the community park there for the kids, and they had a great turnout. I want to thank Mary O'Keefe and those on the Community Park Board for their continued involvement. A lot of efforts, and it's all, we have to remember there are no government funds going into this. This is all local community taking care of themselves, raising their own funds. I appreciate their efforts. I also want to congratulate the Shasta District Fair on another successful run. I understand the revenues are up and possibly the attendance up slightly. And then on more of a closer to home basis, I just want to acknowledge that Shasta County Deputy Carrie Erickson remains locally in the hospital in ICU. Two things I want to say: that Carrie Erickson, Deputy Erickson, is a member of our family, and of course we are concerned. But I just want to publicly thank Sheriff Tom Basenko first. The minute that he heard about this, he literally arranged for life support and transfers, and he met the helicopter at the hospital, and I believe, it's my understanding, he remained there for quite some time. He returned the next day and the next day. I just want to thank our sheriff for not just wearing the title on his sleeve, but for wearing it in his heart and his concern for the members of the deputies community here. I also want to thank those men and women who serve within the department, because they rallied around their fellow deputy as well, even going to his home that he has for sale in the Round Mountain area and preparing it for sale, where he and his wife could not do that at this point and probably will not be able to do so for a while. They all took the time to go up there and simply take care of business. On behalf of the Erickson family, I just want to say to those members, thank you, and to those in the public who are continuing to rally around, provide support and prayer, thank you very much. We'll continue to update you on his progress. That's it.
Supervisor Kehoe.
Thank you, Chairman Modi. Yesterday evening, I attended the RABA board meeting, and that material is available upstairs. That concludes my report.
Thank you. And last week I attended the Sustainable Forest Action Coalition that met in Sacramento with a number of our representatives and their representatives, but Congressman McClintock actually was there in person, but also representatives from Herger's office, Senator Feinstein's office, as well as a number of other congressmen were there. It was a chance for us to continue to advocate for the good and wise use of our forests, including timber harvesting, protecting against wildland fires, promoting recreational use, and the openness of our forest to our citizens to use. The information is upstairs if anyone else wants to see any additional information, but it is an organization that is now represented 20 counties in California, and we also have some now representation from Oregon as well. It is a strictly volunteer coalition. There is no funding from any source. It's just that they'll be volunteering their time and, again, trying to advocate for maintaining our forests for all of us to use in a number of different ways. We now move on to item R4, Health and Human Services Agency and agreements with RESPAD Incorporated.
Great title, huh? Again, Marta McKenzie, Health and Human Services Agency Director. Donnell Ewart and I are going to share this presentation today. I'm going to try to give you a history of what got us here, and then he's going to talk about what we're actually trying to purchase. And I know we have a family member and a hospital representative who needs to get off to another meeting, so we'll try to squeeze them in between. If I say psychiatric health facility and say it as PUF, just know those are the same things. It's our shortcut for psychiatric health facility as an abbreviation. And I also want to apologize in advance if we get into shorthand about bed days. We're not trying to in any way demoralize or not express appreciation for the fact that these are treatment that folks are receiving. We shortcut it to be bed days because that's how we purchase the services from a psychiatric health facility. And so if we do that, just accept it as our shorthand conversation. I think the psychiatric health facility need and history really should start with the closure of Shasta General Hospital in 1987, because what happened at that point in time was when the acute general hospital closed around it, the county was forced with a decision about whether to maintain an independent psychiatric facility. And they chose, you all, your predecessors, chose to keep the psychiatric health facility open. But what it did was end up, I think, shifting some extra overhead costs to that psychiatric facility, because it had to maintain itself as a Medicare certified, fully operational hospital environment with all of the quality assurance and compliance committees and so forth, with only 15 or 16 beds to spread all of that hospital administrative cost. So the county successfully did that, however, until 2004. I was not responsible for the mental health services at that point in time, but did come to many of those public hearings as you and your predecessors explored whether or not it was a viable thing to close down the psychiatric health facility. The decisions, as I remember them, were that it became increasingly impossible to fund that standalone, freestanding psychiatric health facility. And one that I don't think was talked about as much, that in my view, in retrospective, looking at the data, was that we were a drop-off zone, is how I like to characterize it, largely for taking in a number of people who probably were not psychiatric emergencies, but in fact inebriates or tox-positive individuals or others. And I think the hospital found itself increasingly serving a population that was not psychiatrically compromised, but had other ailments or situations that they were then becoming responsible for only because it was a 5150 facility and they had been placed into the hands of the facility by law enforcement. So when I look at our overall admissions for the period of time we had a psychiatric health facility open, we had almost double the number of admissions, but very short lengths of stay for some of those folks. A psychiatric emergency does not clear in a couple of days. It really is national standards between 8 and 12 days sort of time pretty reliably. So having a length of stay in our psychiatric facility of 24 hours was probably not a psychiatric emergency. So I say that because I think how we've gotten to the place we are now, it's all relative history. When I became responsible for mental health services, though, the psychiatric health facility had been closed for a couple of years, and I think what we fell short on as a county was being as responsible as we might for what's that intervening responsibility in time. Where do people end up if we don't have a local psych facility? And what happened was they ended up backing up in the emergency rooms because in the intervening period of time, psychiatric facilities said, we won't accept anybody who doesn't have a medical clearance. We want to make sure that we don't have alcoholics and tox positive or medically compromised individuals who have meningitis or encephalitis or some other issue that's causing their mental acuity that might look like a psychiatric emergency. So we couldn't place anyone in any hospital in California without having that medical clearance. So folks ended up at the emergency room and then had to stay until we found a hospital bed, which as hospital beds in California have really shrunk for psychiatric services, and they have shrunk a lot. I think we have 40% less now than we did 2 decades ago, and yet we have more than 50% more population in California who needs those psychiatric facilities. Folks ended up staying longer and longer at the emergency room. So out of that kind of 1.5 year period of not very, I don't know, good services for mentally ill folks in the intervening time, the Mental Health Assessment and Redesign Collaborative was really formed with a lot of local providers in the hospitals and the mental health department to work on how we could improve that emergency psychiatric situation. And what emerged out of that, which many of you supported, was a crisis stabilization unit, which the mental health department and agency opened in the old psychiatric health facility that used to reside in our mental health department now, which used to be Shasta General Hospital. I feel like I'm talking in circle. Anyway, we have run a crisis stabilization unit since 2006 with county staff. And what we hoped we would accomplish is to allow a location where folks could come from the emergency rooms and we could either try to stabilize them and return them to the community or to home, or give them a safe place to be before we found a hospital bed for them to transfer to. Unfortunately, we have had situations where we've had folks who we determined to be either violent risk or flight risk. And so increasingly, it's become difficult for us to move people into the crisis stabilization unit. And again, we're in a situation where they're backing up into the emergency room, sometimes, unfortunately, for days before we can find a hospital bed somewhere in California. So that's the situation has been for a while. About a year and a half, a psychiatrist who works out of Butte County in Chico approached us about opening a local psych facility. And it was almost like too good to be true. It was like, really? You would want to take the investment risk and open a psych facility here? That's an interesting proposition. And so we talked to him over the course of a couple of meetings, and he was serious, and he wanted to do it as a business investment. He wanted a lot of guaranteed payments by the county in order to open the facility. And we had been in that sort of arrangement in the old days with our major psychiatric provider, Northern Valley Behavioral Health, which is in Sutter, Yuba counties south of us, where we use a lot of psychiatric beds. And we had paid for a guaranteed number of beds and unfortunately had not used them all. So our early contracting experience was not very positive relative to supporting a number of psychiatric beds. Psychiatric emergency is not very predictable, and so we had actually paid for a number of beds that we did not utilize many years before. So we were reluctant to enter into another situation that might end up in that same sort of framework. It also occurred to us that we should probably look for some competition in psychiatric bed facility arrangements. If we had one interested party, we might have others. So we actually sent out letters to every psychiatric health facility standalone in California, and there are about 22 of them. And we actually heard from 5 different parties who might have been interested in opening a local psych facility. So then we went, oh, great, now we've got to write a request for proposals, which took us a while to figure out what we really wanted to propose and how to structure it in such a way that we would really hear back what it was that we needed in the way of a facility. And so that took us several months. We finally got a RFP out on the street, and we received 2 proposals back. We knew that it would be appropriate and responsible to invite the law enforcement individuals and our local hospitals into the process with us, as well as our mental health drug and alcohol advisory board. So we had a good representative group of people to review the proposals with us. We interviewed the proposers on 2 different occasions and settled on one individual to go forward with. We're very happy with the proposal we've received. It's a psychiatrist who worked for the county for 6 years as a previous senior psychiatrist. He moved to the Sacramento area and is now medical director of another psychiatric facility down there. But I think personal circumstances have brought him back to the Shasta County area, and we're very happy with that. So at that point, I think I'll hesitate, ask Randall to come forward, maybe from Shasta Regional Medical Center, who participated with us in the process. He has to get off to a board meeting, and then I'll turn it over to Donnell, and he can talk about what the proposal really contains.
Good morning. I'm Randall Hampling. I'm the CEO of Shasta Regional Medical Center. And as Marta mentioned, I've participated we've been meeting for 2.5 years on this problem and other problems and trying to coordinate healthcare in this community, and been very successful with it. And while I'm up here, I want to compliment she and her staff for everything that they've done, because we started this relationship in an antagonistic way because the hospitals are horribly impacted, continue to be impacted by the 5150s that are brought in for medical clearance. And then usually, I'll give you an example. This Monday morning, or 2 Mondays ago, I walked in. We had 3 people that had been brought in on Friday night and were still there Monday morning. So they'd been there over 60 hours for 5150 clearance, medical screening. These people needed help. The sad thing is we can't help them, nor can Mercy. We do not provide psychiatric care. So what we end up doing is providing housing while she and her staff are scrambling to try to find someplace for these people to go. And now there's 2 aspects that we're getting a private psychiatric facility in this community will help us. First is obviously the people will stay local. They'll talk more about them getting their care locally. Their families can work with them and everything. I mean, the whole psychiatric treatment experience can be much better if it's done locally. The second thing is the screening aspect. When we do the medical screen, we need to then be able to move them to an appropriate location. Right now, we cannot. If we have a local location, we can get that medical screen done usually within 4 hours, and then they can be further evaluated there locally for the psychiatric needs and then treated. So what it does for the emergency room is it takes a lot of use out of it that's inappropriate use. I mean, they're literally being housed. Another aspect is I have to provide a security guard, not to protect them, to protect our employees sometimes. And our employees ask for that, and we do it. Mercy does the same thing. Have a security guard right there watching those people, literally doing nothing, but watching them to protect everybody in the environment. So this would be an overall help to everybody. And I'll end by saying I've worked with them on the team to review the proposal. My concern as a hospital CEO is, can the provider be financially viable? Can they do it? Are they capitalized well enough? It's the first thing I looked at. I said, do you have enough capital to do this? Ask the doctor that. He presented enough information that satisfied me that he's capitalized well enough to keep this thing going, because, as you're well aware, you provide care, then you wait to get paid. So you have to have, you need to be able to front the resource for this. I believe he can do that. So I think it's a great opportunity for the county. I think I would recommend highly that you enter into this agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hempling, and thank you for taking the time to stay here all morning.
Good morning, Donnell Leeward, Director of Adult Services Branch of the Health and Human Services Agency. So the agreement that you have before you today is with RESPAD, and this is a corporation with the principal owner being Dr. O.K. Juan Baruca. And as Marta mentioned, Dr. Juan Baruca was formerly an employee of Shasta County. He worked in our mental health department for 6 years as a psychiatrist. He's triple board certified in psychiatry. He has been our contractor as well since 2008 when he left county service. So he still has been serving the children and youth of our community. In addition, he has been the medical director of Sierra Vista Hospital in Sacramento during that time. And he's well known for his high level of expertise, compassion, and quality care. So the way the contract would operate is that on July 1st, if you approve the agreement, Dr. Juan Baruca and his company RESPAD would take over the crisis stabilization service that we currently operate in adult services right now on our campus on Breslauer. And that unit goes out and assesses and evaluates people who are under 5150 holds or 1799 holds in emergency rooms to determine their disposition. Are they to maintain the hold or to release the hold and offer some other outpatient services? Once that determination is made, then we need to find placement. And this was alluded to by both Marta and Mr. Hempling, is that there is a shortage of inpatient psych beds in California, and we have a great deal of difficulty finding placement, and sometimes people have to wait numerous days in the emergency rooms for us to find placement for them. Dr. Juan Baruca will hire staff to do this task, and we'll carry out the assessment, evaluation, and the placement services. The county, in adult services, we will maintain utilization review, and we'll do all kinds of review of those placement decisions, make sure that there's medical necessity, and meet all of our criteria. We also will continue to provide discharge planning when people come out of psych facilities, and we will continue to provide transportation to and from those facilities around Northern California. In compensation for that particular service, and this is between July 1st and up through December 31st of this year, Dr. Juan Baruca says he may be able to open the facility before then, but that part of the contract does go for a maximum of 6 months. The county will compensate RESPAD for $90,997 per month, and that will be offset by an agreement, a secondary agreement that's part of the package, where RESPAD would lease back our space for $2,244 a month, plus $4 a meal, which would be provided by our Crisis Residential and Recovery Center, which is right next door, which prepares meals already for individuals who are staying there. In addition, there will be offset from third-party payers. So we will pay that flat rate to RESPAD. They will provide us, and they're required by the agreement to provide us with all the information that we need to file claims with Medi-Cal, the County Medical Services Program, and any private payers, and then that revenue will offset the cost of this agreement. After January 1st of 2013, RESPAD will have opened the inpatient psychiatric health facility, PUF, and that licensure in California is for 16 beds. And Dr. Juan Baruca has proposed to provide 10 adult beds and 6 youth beds within that facility. In addition, he'll continue to provide the crisis stabilization services within that facility. So at that point in time, those services will no longer be provided at 2640 Breslauer and will be incorporated into his facility. And at that time, we will stop making those flat rate payments, and the fees for the crisis stabilization will be folded into his daily rate, which will be $853.75 per bed day. And that is where a lot of the cost savings comes for the county, because we will then therefore not be operating this crisis stabilization unit, which our gross cost for that is about $1.4 million a year, and with the offset for those third-party payments, it costs us net about $1 million. So the $91,000 a month payments to RESPAD is just a slightly more than $1 million, which will be offset with all the third-party payments. So that's where we have savings initially. But once the PUF opens, we will cease to have to pay for that at all, because that will be incorporated into his psychiatric health facility. And I also want to mention that the average daily rate that we've been paying for psych beds in the fiscal year 2010-11, which is the last year that was complete, was $862 per bed day. So the rate that he'll be charging is actually less than that, which is over a year ago. So the contract is for a maximum amount of compensation, which equals 11 bed days. So that would be basically us purchasing up to 10 adult beds and then one youth bed, because our utilization of youth beds is only about on average one per day. So that if you're wondering how we came up with the amount of $3.4 million and change, that's what it is. It's the daily bed rate for 11 beds per day for all year. Now, we're not guaranteeing payment for those or purchasing those beds, and it's unlikely that we will actually be able to obtain all of those beds, because all of Northern California has the same problem, and other counties will probably be trying to acquire services there as well. However, I think we have an upper hand getting placements, because he's going to be operating this crisis stabilization and placement services for us, and so they're going to be sitting in his facility, and if there's an opening, obviously I think we'll have priority in getting those beds. But if there's not space, we will have to still transport some of our folks out of county, and there's two particular groups that he will not be able to serve, and those are people who have Medicare. He will not be certified as a Medicare facility, and that is a very long certification process, and I don't believe he's made a decision as to whether he wants to go for that or not. And then there are people with co-occurring disorders. In other words, they have a psychiatric illness, but they also have a physical illness, say like diabetes, that's out of control, and they need to be in a medical facility that has a psych unit. And so we have to send those people out of county as well. Based on our utilization right now, even in addition to those groups, there probably will be some people who will still not be able to receive services just because of capacity, and we will still have to transport them out of county. But our demand for those services out of county will be greatly reduced. So there are numerous advantages to entering into this agreement with RESPAD. Some of them have been alluded to already. The first, and I think the most important, is that we will be able to provide services to individuals with serious mental illness, an acute psychiatric illness requiring hospitalization right here locally. Because one of the key elements for recovery for mental illness is social support. And so being near friends and family who can then visit the person and so forth is really important. And that's been one of the negatives of having to send people out of county. In addition, having those youth beds available is just a huge advantage to our community. There have not been any inpatient youth psych beds in Shasta County since the early 90s, when they were provided at the rehab hospital on Eureka Way. So that's going to be a big addition to our community that has not been available. In addition, Marta mentioned the decline in inpatient psych beds in general in California. So this will be 16 new beds in Northern California. And of course, that'll help others, but it helps us too because of our difficulty in finding placement now. In addition, we've been spending millions of dollars in payments to facilities outside of Shasta County, and these are tax dollars for our citizens, and they are serving our citizens. But if this local facility is created, those dollars will be spent here in our county, creating jobs in our county, rather than sending them somewhere else. Also, I forgot to mention that ResPad will be doing all of the after-hours, weekend, and holiday crisis phone service for us, which will eliminate our need to have on-call psychiatrists and other staff on call. So there'll be cost savings there for us as well. And then there's the issue that Randall mentioned with the emergency rooms and being able to streamline care so that we don't have people sitting in the ERs for so long. They'll be able to move over to the crisis stabilization unit within the PUF. And there's a big distinction between what's going to exist in the PUF and what we have now, and that is that that facility will be locked, and ours is not locked. And the reason ours is not locked is because we're paying for it with Mental Health Services Act money, and we cannot use that for locked facilities. So that's going to be another change in the service that's very significant, because one of the reasons we have to leave a lot of people in the emergency rooms is they're combative and assaultive, or they're an elopement risk, which means they may flee. And if they can be in a locked facility, that's going to allow more patients to move from the emergency rooms over to the stabilization unit. And then finally, there's the cost savings to the taxpayers in the county of Shasta. We have to project this. It's hard to make an exact, give you an exact dollar amount, but we believe we'll save approximately $500,000 in the fiscal year 2012-13 while we're in transition, and then about $800,000 a year thereafter. So it's a significant savings, which will be a help to our budget situation. The final issue that you need to consider today is the resolution, which would grant the staff of ResPad authority to write 5150 holds, and repealing the previous resolution, which did not include them. And with that, Martin, I can take questions.
Mr. You would have a question. For the benefit of those that are not familiar with this system, would you describe for us the 5150 process? Okay, I'll see if I can do my best with that. 5150 is a code section in the Health and Safety Code which allows certain individuals, law enforcement individuals, and certain medical personnel who have been certified by resolution by the Board of Supervisors to put a 3-day hold on an individual who is gravely disabled, meaning that they can't provide food, clothing, and shelter for themselves, or they're a danger to themselves or others. And the way that process works is if a law enforcement officer goes out to a situation in a home where somebody is threatening to hurt themselves, commit suicide, they can put a 5150 hold, put that person in their squad car, take them to one of our local hospitals for medical clearance, and then that hospital contacts us. Once they're medically cleared, we go down and do the assessment, decide whether to maintain the hold or release and do some other type of outpatient treatment. And then if the hold is maintained, we look for placement. They go to an inpatient facility, and if they need to stay longer than 3 days, then there's a court proceeding which takes place, which would then put them on a 5250 hold, which would be for 14 days. So they could stay in that facility for up to 17 days. And those are locked facilities. They're not free to leave until the hold is released. So that's a brief overview. Thank you.
There might be some other questions, but I think I want to check. I have one request to speak. I don't know if the person's still here or not. If they are, good. She may need to go, or you would like to speak now, or you want to wait a little bit longer?
I'd be happy to speak now.
Yeah, okay. I think you've been waiting a lot. So this is Becky Kale, or is it Kaylee?
It's Kale.
Kale, okay. It's been a long morning. I figured maybe you might want to.
Yeah, it's been a long morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Pleasure to be here. My name's Becky Kale, and I'm here, I guess, to give a more personal side to this. And a lot of what they've been speaking about the mental health and the psychiatric hospital, I've experienced with my own family. I'm the parent of a child with severe psychiatric issues. He's been 5150'd more times than I can remember in the past 4 to 5 years. He spent 5 or 6 weeks in a psychiatric hospital within a 3-month period during this past calendar year. And everything they've been talking about, what occurs in the hospitals as far as being put on a hold and being guarded and being kept for 1 or 2 days, then maybe released back home, and having to travel, having a child taken to a different county, to a facility where you're not familiar with where they are. It's just so traumatic for the whole family. And to have this facility here in Shasta County is huge. Don't know what else to say.
I think you said it pretty well. Thank you for taking the time. Questions of staff? Mr. Baugh.
Thank you, Chairman Modi. Could you maybe expand a little bit more in regards to capacity? Specifically, I'm trying to understand the existing 23-hour evaluation capacity that will eventually be blended together with continuing care, and is there enough space to accomplish both? That's my question.
The current crisis stabilization unit has 4 beds. That's what you're restricted to by licensure standards. I don't know the final configuration of the psychiatric health facility as it's being designed, but as I understand it, once he's licensed for a 16 admission, those are patients who are admitted to the psychiatric health facility. He's limited to that number. He can then have, in a side-by-side area, the equivalent of the stabilization area, which is an assessment area. If someone is transported to a 72-hour facility, that whole process is intended to be determining whether or not the 72-hour 5150 hold is to be upheld and whether someone is to be admitted for a period of time to see whether or not additional treatment is necessary or they can be released to home. If you can't make the standard of restricting someone's civil liberties by determining that they are in need of longer-term psychiatric treatment, you're not supposed to hold them. And so you really are restricted to the 16-bed of admitted and then a 4-bed crisis area assessment area. So will that meet the total needs of the community? Not completely. We've had some really awful days this last couple of months where we've had upwards of 20 people a day in psychiatric health facilities. So it will not meet that test completely, but it will certainly be a long ways better than we have now with no beds in our county and everyone having to leave.
Yes. Well, and I would add to that, thank you, very clear answer. And I'm thrilled to see the progress that you've made and the fact that you're going to have services here in Shasta County. It makes tremendous sense. I'm positive a majority of our residents are appreciative as well. While we're kind of guessing at the future here, but I would like to go there anyway, how do you see future expansion of this facility happening? I know you haven't even, it doesn't exist yet today, but yet I'm sure you've given some thought as to how you progress down the road.
Frankly, I've come to the conclusion that we were very fortunate and a little serendipitous. I think the personal circumstances of this psychiatrist is he just had triplets, and I think he really wants to raise them in Shasta County, not in the Sacramento area. That's serendipity.
There you go.
The price that he was able to settle on with us is affordable. The original price we started with the other psychiatrist was not. And so I think it's partially luck, actually, that we have a local psychiatrist who's willing to make the investment in Shasta County, who wants to live here. And we think he's a terrific partner and has been really good to work with and a very good process up till now. I think everybody feels good about that. So I don't know what the future would be in terms of expansion. You know, could he open a second 16-bed facility if that was the need in the North State? I think that's to be determined. The Medicare certification is a big deal. We don't pay anything for a Medicare hospitalization visit right now. But if that Medicare patient is hospitalized in somewhere that's not Medicare certified, we pay the whole cost. So the issue of how many of our clients are Medicare recipients and whether they need a facility, Randall didn't say it, but one of the things he's been talking about is whether or not SRMC will open a geropsychiatric unit once this one is open, and perhaps then we would have a local Medicare facility as well, at least to take some patient volume. So there's also folks who believe that having a local facility will help us with psychiatrist recruitment as well, because psychiatrists would much rather come to a community that has a local facility to deal with their patients when they have emergencies. So maybe it will help us in other regards as well.
Well, it does seem to start the ball rolling to answer so many things in a positive way. Have you made arrangements for cost escalations as we go along? How will you handle, everything always goes up in terms of cost?
Go ahead.
This current agreement is for 3 years, and it has a fixed rate of $853, but there is a provision in there that does allow MARTA or her designee to accept new rates if they went up, and I think it would probably be reasonable to assume that there will be some escalation in costs. And this is a new operation, and Dr. Juan Baruca has a great reputation as a psychiatrist, but this is a kind of a new business venture, and I would say that's where there's some risk involved. Is we need to see if he can manage a business like this, and he's got to see how his costs work out, relative to his revenue and so forth. So that is something we'll have to be monitoring very carefully.
And one more question, and I'll yield the floor to the rest of the board. What happens if, for some reason, there's a slight delay from, was it January opening date?
We'll be back with the use agreement to extend for a few more months. Council was concerned about the competitive nature of that use of county space, and they were comfortable with a 6-month period of time. We haven't talked about the comfort zone beyond a 6-month if, say, they needed it another 60 days before the psychiatrist could open the psychiatric facility. So we'll have to cross that bridge when we get to it. But I think the original proposal was to build a standalone facility. We would have been looking at a hospital open in 2 years. This is really about renovating some existing space. So it's kind of the timeline for construction and renovation and how that proceeds. But he's pretty optimistic he can do it in that period of time.
Thank you very much.
Supervisor Hawes.
Well, I just compliment you on where we've gotten with this. I was here when we had to close the other one, and it wasn't a pleasant time, believe me. I know it's been a hardship ever since, so I'm going to move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion. Supervisor Kehoe.
Thank you, Chairman Modi. On the last paragraph on page 3 of the staff report, and you don't have to refer to this because you've got it memorized. This proposed agreement will allow Shasta County access to the ResPad facility for psychiatric inpatient services on a first-come, first-served basis, and then both crisis services and psychiatric inpatient service will be provided 7 days per week, 24 hours a day. However, ResPad will only be compensated when a Shasta County resident is admitted to the PHF to receive inpatient services. And again, on number 7 on the following page, you clarify that when you say the cost of the crisis assessment and stabilization services are included in the per day inpatient rate and therefore will not be a separate expense for the county. Now, Mr. Hempley raised the question about economic viability of this proposal. And in your mind, is this arrangement reflective of a viable economic model?
We need Leanne to come up and answer that question. Actually, that was the second interview we had with Dr. Juan Baruca, was to give us his business plan and financing strategy, and I actually think he gave us way more of the profit and loss statements than maybe were reasonable to do, but Leanne can shed a little light from the business point of view.
Thank you.
Good morning, Leanne Link, Director of Business and Support Services for the Health and Human Services Agency. We actually combed through his proposed financial statements pretty thoroughly and questioned a lot of his costs and what he anticipated. We were particularly concerned with cash flow for him, wondering whether or not he was going to be able to carry the cost of starting up a facility before the reimbursements actually started running into him. That would be the foremost concern right out of the gate for us. He was able to provide us with a pretty detailed financial plan, as well as documents that substantiated his ability to carry that cash flow. So without going into a whole lot more detail, we felt, and we all felt, very secure in that.
Good. Thank you. Ms. McKenzie, this is a fee-for-service agreement?
It is?
Next question. They're going to, the report says July 1, will they be moving into the crisis center?
We hope so. We've asked lots of questions about that. It's only 11 or 12 days away, but he says he's ready if the contract is signed today, yeah.
Will any county employees be displaced by the move-in of ResPad?
We have had, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to characterize it, extra help staff largely filling many of the crisis stabilization responsibilities for several years. I think when we started the Crisis Stabilization Service, we weren't sure that it was going to be viable financially or practical for us to maintain, and so we don't have a large number of permanent staff there. And all of those staff we intend to move into other responsibilities. Most of them are nursing or mental health workers who have lots of need in other parts of the system. So we do not intend to displace the extra help staff. We will not schedule them for more hours. We do intend to have quite an overlap period of time, though, to make sure everything's working in coordination and collaborative way that we've worked so far.
Final question, knowing your quest for thoroughness, you have undertaken a burden and benefit analysis of this proposal. Is there any foreseeable downside to Shasta County in this proposed agreement?
Boy, I certainly don't see any. From my point of view, there's a large burden of a realigned mental health services to county government, and this actually privatizes some elements of it that I think is really necessary. We've been affording 24/7 staff, which is a very expensive responsibility for us to maintain. And in the future, we will largely be able to be relieved of that if we have a good, competent partner who's able to work with us, who's going to maintain a 24/7 staff anyway, so they might as well take on some of the additional responsibilities that we carry independently.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisor Hawes?
That's what I was going to mention, 7 days per week, 24 hours a day. How can you beat that? I mean, we've been having to fill those gaps, and it's got to be expensive.
It is.
I just have one final question. I believe you said it was currently about 1.4 million per year to offer what we're paying for operations now, and you have an offset of about 400,000, I think, from reimbursement costs. Do you sort of expect that same kind of ratio to continue forward with this new system?
Actually, our reimbursement is going to increase slightly because of the realignment of behavioral health in the 2011 realignment. The state used to have a state maximum allowance, SMA, that we could bill for to try to control costs in Medi-Cal, but now that they've realigned everything to us and we're the state match for the federal dollars, now they're going to allow us to build the upper payment limit on the federal side, which was higher, so we should actually get more revenue to offset our costs. But that's an independent thing that would happen anyway.
All right, thank you. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Well done, thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Gale, for coming in today. Item R5, which is a agreement with the Nurse Family Partnership. Melissa?
Good morning. Chairman Modi, members of the board. Melissa Janilevich, Regional Services Director with the Health and Human Services Agency. The item before you is to enter into an agreement with the Nurse Family Partnership Organization. This is an organization who owns the rights to the home visiting program that Shasta County was funded to implement. The board took action on that item in February 28th, approved the funding for that item on February 28th. We need to enter into this agreement to get to the next level of implementation, to access the training, the database, the client education materials, and other program materials. We can't really implement the program in any fashion without entering some sort of an agreement with Nurse Family Partnership. So this contract was considered by the board on June 12th, and a number of issues were raised regarding the proprietary and directive nature of the agreement, and staff were instructed to complete research on those issues and bring the proposed contract back to the board, and which we have done today. So you have, those discussions were completed, and you have a revised agreement, revised contract for your consideration for today. So I wanted to start with just a little bit of background. The Nurse Family Partnership home visiting project is an evidence-based program. It serves first-time low-income mothers who enroll voluntarily in the program during pregnancy. Women participating in the program are visited with a prescribed visit schedule by one public health nurse during pregnancy and through the child's second birthday. The program produces improved pregnancy and birth outcomes, improved parenting and child development outcomes, and improved self-sufficiency outcomes. All of this fits very well with the Health and Human Services Agency's strategic plan and helps us to move forward in achieving those goals. A little bit of history of the Nurse-Family Partnership. It has a very long and extensive research base to it. The initial studies began in 1977, another study in 1988 and 1994. The first replication sites began in 1996 after 20 years worth of research had accumulated, proving that this was a well-designed program. And there's been a steady increase in replication programs since 1996. Currently, 40 states have Nurse-Family Partnership sites. There are 13 counties in California with Nurse-Family Partnership projects, including Humboldt County in Northern California. And through this next fiscal year, with the expansion of the funding that we received, 13 additional counties in California will be expanding, or I'm sorry, 9 additional counties will be expanding programs in California. And 2007 was the year that Nurse-Family Partnership became a trademarked program. So that's just a little bit of history of development of the program. So one of the critical concepts that you read time and time again in this contract was a phrase, a concept called fidelity of the model. And I think that was one of the concerns that was raised maybe last week. I just wanted to spend just a moment talking about fidelity of the model. It's described as defined with a terminology on page 2, and then in Exhibit A in the contract, it lists all of the model elements that are included that are part of fidelity of the model. The definition that is provided is, and I'm just going to read it, is implementing the program in a manner consistent with the model elements and therefore maximizing the likelihood of achieving results comparable to those measured in the research. That's one of the things about evidence-based programs that you just can't get around is that basic concept. And for me, the easiest way to understand it is it's just like a recipe. You have to have the necessary ingredients and you have to follow the recipe in order to get the same dish every time. And that's what this is all about and what Nurse-Family Partnership tries to ensure with any of their programs. And so that's why you read about that time and time again and what it takes to get the same results with an evidence-based program. And so there are 18 model elements of this program, and those are outlined very specifically. And so some of them are as simple as it has to be a first-time mom, they have to enroll during the pregnancy. Those are pretty cut and dried, and you don't need a whole lot of quality assurance to make sure you're complying with the program. But some of them are that you apply the visit-to-visit guidelines correctly. Those can be interpreted in lots of different ways. So those are the ones that Nurse-Family Partnership offers a lot of assistance for local programs to make sure that you're implementing the project correctly. And so that's where the assessment comes from. So we received comments from the board last week about concerns. Those were taken back and discussed with the contractor. And we provided in the board summary the results of our discussions, and in your contract the changes are highlighted, and I just wanted to briefly go through those real quickly, what those changes were, or did anyone have questions about what those changes were? Is everybody good with the changes, or should I go through the changes?
Let's see. I'm good with the changes.
Okay. I guess not.
I guess not. Okay, so I'll just briefly, the two items that were not, the contractor agreed to change all of the items with the exception of two. One of them was the requirement for the Community Advisory Board. That's one of the model elements we can't get around. And the other was use of the logo and the information that they are going to provide us for the proper use of the logo. So those were the two items that they did not agree to change. So with that, are there any questions?
Mr. Kehoe?
Thank you, Chairman Modi. I applaud your industry in going back to them and getting some, what I would consider concessions, minor concessions. Given the lateness of the hour, I'm not going to belabor my concerns over this contract, other than pointing out that to a certain extent, I find it demeaning to staff and Shasta County. And the second concern I have is that I think the county is a public relations outfit for the vendor here. But having said that, I do have one final observation and concerns the two conditions that they were unwilling to change on. And if you look at the third paragraph on page 2 of the staff report, indicates that in discussion with NFP and CDPH, this section is intended to ensure a community group is overseeing the implementation of the program, develops operating policies and procedures, ensures community collaboration, and avoids duplication of effort, and seeks long-term funding options and support for the program. Is this construed to mean that this group, this community group, has financial or fiscal responsibility for the program?
This group will build support, not just financial, but also support for referrals, and but yes, a piece of it will also be to sustain long-term financial commitments from potential private funders.
Who holds fiduciary responsibility for the execution of this agreement?
Shasta County.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Bob?
Thank you, Chair Modi. I do want to thank you for taking the time to go back to the contractor, to go through the contract, to address the issues that were brought forward by the board last week. While it is, you were not able to answer every question, I think you did a great job, and it's a worthwhile project. I'm going to move approval.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
That's 4-1. Item R6, approval of the juvenile justice plan for fiscal year 11-12. Chief Foreman.
Chairman Modi, members of the board, I'm not sure you remembered me, but my name is Wes Foreman. I'm the Chief Probation Officer. This has been a long day. I'm here today to seek your approval on the juvenile justice plan for 11-12, and as modified, and approval on a related budget item for fiscal year 11-12 related to the same plan, and that there's a third approval for approval of the progress report. Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act 2000 was implemented to provide, to allocate funds to each county probation department to implement programs to reduce juvenile crime and delinquency. For several years now, the county and the probation department have been fostering 4 programs. One is called the Mentally Ill Offender Program, or the WINGS program. WINGS stands for Wraparound Interagency Network for Growth and Stability. Primarily, this program works with juveniles who have mental health concerns, and the idea is to wrap staff and resources around them to keep them local in the community and prevent them from long-term out-of-home care. The second program is the Juvenile Accountability Caseload Program. We refer to it as JAC. This is a preventive program. This is primarily for first-time offenders. They're diverted from the system. We partner with the Youth Violence Prevention Council to do some upfront work, and with the hope of preventing them from actually entering the system. The third program is the Juvenile Sex Offender Program. this program for offenders that found themselves in trouble with sexual offenses. This program provides some education and counseling for them in an attempt to move them towards appropriate sexual behavior rather than their inappropriate behavior. And then the fourth program is a Juvenile Detention Alternatives Program. We refer to that as JDAP, and this is a program that assists us in actually removing individuals who would most likely have to stay in custody of the juvenile hall. What we do is provide them in an intensive caseload and intensive services that are outside the juvenile hall. And all these programs have been successful, and this request is for your approval to accept the plan and some money that was allocated to us so that we could actually put those monies to use.
Questions of Chief Foreman? Mr. Kehoe?
I have a question of County Council. Mr. Cruz, I'm the board representative on the Youth Violence Prevention Council. As such, should I recuse in this matter?
Thank you, Mr. Kehoe. You do not necessarily have to recuse if you are simply a non-paid member of the board of the Youth Violence Prevention Council. However, if you feel it more appropriate to do so, that's certainly you're certainly welcome to do so.
I think, Mr. Chairman, in the interest of reducing any ambiguity concerning disposition of this matter, I will recuse and I will vacate.
Okay, let's get the heck out.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Moving second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Thank you, Mr. Chief Foreman.
He just barely got comfortable out there.
We'll move on to item R7, which is a scheduled hearing. A court challenge to action taken by the Board of Supervisors on any project or decision may be limited to only those issues raised during the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the Board of Supervisors during or prior to the scheduled public hearing. R7 is a zone amendment 10-003 in the Montgomery Creek area. Mr. Walker.
Chairman Modi, members of the Board of Supervisors, I'm Bill Walker, Senior Planner with the Shasta County Department of Resource Management in the Planning Division. The project site for this project is located in the Montgomery Creek area on the west side of Woodhill Drive, approximately 0.4 miles south of the intersection of Woodhill Drive and State Highway 299 East. The proposal is to rezone a 35-acre portion of 160 contiguous acres owned by the applicant from the Timber Production Zone District to the Timberland District to allow a residence for the owner and timber manager. And to rezone out of timber production, as you know, specific findings must be made regarding consistency with portions of the California Constitution, the Timberland Productivity Act, and the public interest. The property is in the Timber General Plan Land Use Designation. It is forest land. It contains timber, annual grassland, wet meadow, and riparian habitats, and vegetation at the site is composed of species common to the mixed conifer forest. Land adjacent to the project site includes both timber production zones and other timberlands. Development in the vicinity of the Montgomery Creek Rural Community Center is characterized by rural residential and mixed-use development, surrounded by timberlands, which are predominantly zoned timberland, TL, when located adjacent to residential and mixed-use designated lands. The reason I'm saying this is just to indicate that this is consistent with our zoning and our plan for the Montgomery Creek Rural Community Center. The Timber Production Zone District is used to identify timberlands that, pursuant to the Timberland Productivity Act, are important to maintaining a productive timberland base in Shasta County and the state of California at large, and which are being valued for tax purposes based on timber production as the highest and best use of the land. Otherwise, this land would be taxed at a higher rate. It's basically comparable to the Williamson Act, only it's used for timberland. The use of these lands is restricted to the growing and harvesting of timber and compatible uses. Implementation of the act, this was back in the late 60s, early 70s, established the county's timber production land base at approximately 637,000 acres. Since then, the land base has been expanded, timber land base has been expanded to approximately 685,000 acres. So we have more land now in timber production than we did when we started out. Apart from timber production lands, there are tens of thousands of acres that are in the T or Timber General Plan Land Use Designation that are currently zoned timberland or unclassified, but these lands may be eligible for timber production zoning and may be used for forest management activities, including timber production. Of course, any changes would have to go through the Board of Supervisors and be approved by you folks. The state encourages the continued maintenance of the timberland base by affording a tax incentive to lands designated TP and prescribing specific processes for rezoning lands that are zoned TP. A landowner can either request a 10-year phase-out or an immediate rezoning. In this case, the landowner has requested an immediate rezoning, and the board may tentatively approve an immediate rezoning pending approval of a conversion permit by the State Board of Forestry. This is one of these weird actions that you folks approve it, but it also has to receive approval by the Board of Forestry for them to get out immediately. In order to grant a tentative approval, the Board of Supervisors must adopt specific findings by a 4/5 vote. So we need at least 4 votes to approve this. The Planning Commission reviewed and recommends the specific findings that are attached to your or that were attached in the Planning Commission staff report and resolution and are incorporated into the board resolution that's proposed for approval. If the Board of Supervisors tentatively approves the rezoning and the Board of Forestry approval is subsequently granted, the requested TL zone would take effect. At that time, the recoupment fee would be assessed and the applicant would move forward with plans to develop a home site. Basically, they're going to have to pay the back taxes, more or less the difference between what they would have paid if they weren't zoned TP and what they actually paid. So it's not exact, but it's more or less in that line. So basically, the county will recoup additional tax money as a result of this action if you choose to approve it. So we recommend that the Board of Supervisors adopt the California Environmental Quality Act or CEQA determination of a mitigated negative declaration with the findings as specifically set forth in Planning Commission Resolution 2012-017 and adopt the attached resolution approving an immediate rezoning of a portion of a timber production zone pending approval by the California State Board of Forestry, and finally make the rezoned findings and introduce and waive the reading of the ordinance to amend the zoning plan of the County of Shasta identified in Zone Amendment 10-003 as specifically set forth in Planning Commission Resolution 2012-017. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Supervisor Hawes.
Well, I just wanted to ask, is the pond in this separation now? There's a nice pond on that property, or do you know?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. That's just, doesn't make any difference.
Any other questions of staff?
Yes. Mr. Walker, relative to the findings that the board has to make, on the second page of the resolution, it talks about item 2, talks about the project would not permanently or unnecessarily convert timberland to urban or other uses because the proposal is consistent with such and such. And then when you go down to C, it says the immediate rezoning would benefit the public in as much as it would increase the property tax base of the county and be more consistent with the development pattern in the vicinity of the Montgomery Creek Rural Community Center, where TL zoning is predominantly applied to timberlands. So in essence, the property owner and the caretaker and the advisor, forestry advisor, is going to locate a residence.
That's correct.
And this is not a conflict then?
No.
Is that correct?
Because we're taking, or we would be taking 35 acres out of timber production zoning. That doesn't mean that 35 acres is not still going to be used for timber production. It just means that the way our county zoning code is written and the way the state regulations are written, it's hard to put a residence on a piece of property that's zoned timber production. So
if
the
the
use,
owner-
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Walker.
Well, we've
The
done.
owner for- If the owner, by way of ridiculous example, wanted to build a residence and build a restaurant up there, that would be a different matter entirely.
Exactly, and that would not be consistent with the timberland zone district, which this is proposed to change to.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Supervisor Haas.
Well, this property is, if you're familiar with that area, it's off the old highway, just before the old highway connects to 299 now. It's actually Wood Hill North, I believe is the name of it. The property's on, and there's quite a few homes on that hill. In fact, the former older supervisor that passed away this last year lives on that also. So there's quite a lot of people there, and I don't see anything wrong. I think this is probably a good idea. There'll be somebody there watching the property. Since Mr. Gordon works for CAL FIRE now, I don't know that he even lives up there like he used to. So he was actually a member of the fire department, Round Mountain Fire Department at one time. So
I believe,
okay.
Mrs. Gordon?
Oh, you're the wife. Okay. Well, I know him very well. I think, I understand what you're trying to do, and it's probably a real good idea. You bet.
Okay, this is a scheduled hearing, so I will open the hearing. Anybody from the public wish to address the board on this issue? Seeing none, hearing's closed. Pleasure of the board. Okay, moved and seconded. Mr. Walker, one last question or discussion. You indicated that there is a recoupment fee that will be assessed.
That's correct.
Does the owner know of this fee in advance?
I believe they do.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
It's a beautiful piece of property, by the way.
The Board of Supervisors will recess to a closed session, discuss only one item. That's our existing litigation with the California Department of Transportation versus the County of Shasta. We are canceling our discussion with our labor negotiator. If there is any reportable action at the conclusion of the closed session, it will be brought out to open session, and we are recessed.